Hi, it's Jo here, and today I want to take you through a bit of my process making a 25cm bead jointed art doll. I often don't have an exact plan when I start out making a doll. I tend to have a look at the materials I've got and I'm inspired by that. For this doll I was inspired by some blue and silver lace that I've had in my stash for years. I've had it a long time but never really felt the inspiration to use it until now. I work from my own templates. I've developed my templates for doll making over many years. I made my first one back in around 2011. I found the template for a doll in an old doll making book and it didn't quite suit what I needed, so I adjusted a few bits on it and made a doll from that, and then I adjusted a few more bits and a few more until eventually the pattern was just my own. And I've remade it and reworked it many times since over the years, and my dolls have just evolved as a result. I use 100% cotton base fabric. Most of the time I just use white cotton sheeting fabric because it's nice high thread count, it's quite tough, and it's got a little bit of a stretch but it doesn't have too much give in it and it doesn't fray too easily. I know doll makers who use Kona cotton and have good results with that, and some of them use Moda solids and find that good for their needs too. And sew all the pieces for my dolls on my Janome sewing machine. I keep stitches as small as I can so I know that I'm going to get a nice strong seam. I sew all the seams before I cut the pieces out so you don't get any warping or any overstretching. I'll usually double stitch the seams too, so I'll go around once and then I'll turn around and I'll sew back the other way. So I'm sewing over the seam I've just done, and that way I'm sure it's not going to burst when I'm stuffing it. The trickiest bit in stitching the pieces can be lining up stripes for the legs. What we don't want is stepping along the seam. We want those stripes to be completely perfectly lined up. I'm going to do another video on that and some other tips for doll making at some point, so do subscribe if you haven't already. I find that cutting out the pieces using pinking shears helps to avoid puckering when you turn the pieces ready to stuff them. I'm going to stiff stuff the doll, so I want to make sure that there's no pinching around corners. I use Kapok fibre for stuffing my dolls. I used to use polyester fibre fill when I first started, and that's fine for certain dolls, but because my dolls have a lot of small details, I find because Kapok fibre is a very fine fibre, it's a lot easier to get into those little corners and it gives a much finer result. You need to push the stuffing out into the corners, out into the edges as you go, and then add more stuffing to the middle to get a nice smooth finish around the outside. If you do get any lumps, you can smooth them out using weight. Sometimes I've used books or just pressing the doll against the desk to smooth out lumps where I don't want them. Or you can also use a fine needle through the surface of the fabric to just carefully move a small lump from the surface, and that can just be enough sometimes to smooth it out. I use a strong polyester thread to close the seams. My favourite is a Gutterman extra strong thread. The top stitch thread is a little bit thicker, but that can also be used for this. I use the top stitch thread for jointing the limbs. I like to use metal beads for jointing. I've used other kinds of beads in the past. I started out using plastic beads, but they can chip and scratch and they didn't give me the quality finish that I wanted. I experimented with a few other materials. I experimented with glass, but I found that they can have sharp edges which can actually break the thread as you're pulling it through tightly. I tried wooden beads but had the opposite effects. The beads are too soft, so the thread would dig into them and cause a groove as you're pulling it through. So I settled on metal because it's a nice hard material which is also smooth and it gives a really nice finish and they just look beautiful. At the moment I button joint the shoulders on my dolls. This gives movement kind of back and forth, but I would like to experiment with other jointing techniques. I want to try bead jointing the shoulders, so that's something I'm going to try soon. So maybe I'll make a video about that when I do it. I will need to make a new template if I'm going to try bead jointing the shoulders, as the shoulders will need to be a different shape. So that's something I'm working on. I paint shoes and boots onto my dolls using acrylic paint. The issue with acrylic can be that it cracks or doesn't sit well on fabric, so I add a fabric medium and that just gives it a little bit more stretch. The fabric medium needs to be fixed, so I use heat to fix it. Because you can't really iron a doll, I use a hairdryer and I find that works really well. The shading around the eyes I create using Derwent Colour Soft pencils, because they're a really nice, soft, smudgy pencil which gives a really highly pigmented finish and adds a lot of depth and brings the eyes to life. I fix this using a pastel fixative spray. This stops it rubbing off and it also gives a little bit of UV protection as well. The fine line work around the eyes and the mouth and also on the tattoo is done using Derwent Line Maker pens. These are nice quality fine liner pens which last for years and they won't wash off if the doll happens to get wet. Some permanent fine liner pens contain gelatin, so I use the Derwent ones because I know that they don't contain gelatin. They are vegan friendly. I've always used the draping method for clothing my dolls. I make fixed clothing so it can't be taken on and off generally. I just fit the fabric to the doll to create the look that I want. I don't use a pattern for this, I just cut out the fabric to the size that I need and add details to it and then pin it to the doll and stitch it in place so it fits precisely. I always needle felt the hair on my dolls using my Clover pen style needle felting tool. I love this tool because you can put 3 felting needles in together and they all sit quite close together, so for small projects like my doll hair it just works perfectly. On this doll I'm using acrylic fibre. Sometimes I use bamboo fibre or other plant fibres. Synthetic and plant fibres can both be needle felted. They felt into the kapok fibre without any problems and will give a strong result. I'll add some links to the description for some of the materials and the equipment that I use, so if you want to have a go at any of the techniques I've mentioned, you'll know where to go. If there are any parts of the doll making process you'd like to know more about, if there's any techniques that you've seen today that you'd like a bit more information on, drop me a comment down below and I will try and answer as many of those questions as I can in future videos. Check out the video that YouTube is going to suggest here, and I'll see you next time. Bye!